Greetings from the Dark Continent, Conscious Caracal here, or Ernst van Zyl, and tonight I'm talking to a man that Floyd Shivambu checks under his bed for at night. He's also the Boer boogeyman, Ernst Roets, but his more formal title that he's known by is the Head of Policy and Action at AfriForum. And Ernst was making the social media news lately because he appeared for a second time on the Tucker Carlson Tonight show. This was Ernst's first time there. The first time he appeared, it also created quite a story here domestically in South Africa. And this time, the people watching Ernst's every move also didn't disappoint. There was also a little bit of chaos here in South Africa when people realized where Ernst was. So welcome on the show, Ernst.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back. I was abroad for quite some time because before going to America, I was part of a liaison tour to Hungary. And then there's the big mystery of how I got to America, which also took me some time. But it's very good to be back. I was back at the office yesterday and today. I had last week. I just had a holiday with my wife. So it's good to be back.
And the purpose of tonight's interview is because, unfortunately, we only have a clip on YouTube of Ernst's hour-long discussion with Tucker. That hour-long discussion is on Fox Nation, and unfortunately, as I understand it, you can't watch it if you're in South Africa. But that's why this type of conversation is here. So we're going to go through all the topics that Ernst discussed with Tucker, and he's going to be telling us what he told Tucker about South Africa, and you, the audience, can judge for yourself whether he's spreading misinformation or telling the truth. So, Ernst, maybe just a simple way to start off, something that quite a lot of people wonder about is your relationship to Tucker in regards to how do you know him? How did you manage to get a slot on his show for a second time?
Well, yes. So we've been going as AfriForum to America since 2012. That was our first time that I went there. Let me just fix my screen here. And most of the time, it's been, especially initially, we went to New York, where the UN headquarters are. There is we went through an entire process to register AfriForum as an organization with special consultative status, as they call it, at the UN. And we started in 2000. We actually started before 2012. We actually started going to the meetings. That's a long story, so I'm not going to go into the detail. And eventually, we succeeded in 2020, last year, I think October. So we are registered now with the UN. But having gone to New York for a few times, we started going to liaising in Washington, 2014 or 15. And we've been going there. I think we've had a few trips there. The point I'm getting to is that that our international liaison, particularly in the US, people think there's some hidden, secret strategy. And at the end of the day, the strategy is largely or mostly based on networking. You meet people, you have discussions with people, they introduce you to new people, you go back, you meet new people, and so you broaden the network. You can broaden the network while you're not there through Zoom meetings and so forth, but it's important to go there because every time we go to Washington, we're now at the point where there's our network in Washington in particular is too big. You can't have a 2-week trip to Washington and meet everyone we've had discussions with in the past. And with the network broadening, we were introduced to Tucker Carlson and many others. And I think what worked out well was at the time when we met Tucker, we met him through email, basically, initially. He was that was when expropriation without compensation was really starting to make the news. It was early 2018, and he was obviously interested in the topic as a journalist. But other than that, what we learned when we actually met him in person in 2018 is that he was reading Pakenham's book on the Anglo-Boer War, and he has he's a very, very well-read person. I can tell you that, and he's been reading about South African history, about Afrikaner history. And so he's been interested. We met him in 2018 when I was with him in studio on his show, and we've been in contact since. It's not like we I mean, it's not like we're best friends or something like that, but he's a journalist, and we, as AfriForum, is an organization that is very much involved, and you could say at the forefront of what's happening in South Africa. And in that sense, he's interested in South Africa. And so a few, maybe 2-3 months ago, I am in contact with him. So every now and then I send him, latest information about what's happening in South Africa with a news report. And I informed him about the firearms bill, because that's something we spoke about last time we met in 2018. And he actually asked, after the interview, he asked me and Kali, what's it like to own, what's firearms regulation like? And we said to him, well, that's one of the things that it's fairly well in South Africa, in the sense that you can buy a firearm. And then when this bill was published, that according to which they want to make it illegal to own a firearm for self-defense purposes, I sent Tucker through. I said, listen, you remember we spoke about this the other time? This is the latest. And he said, well, he wants to do an update about South Africa, so come on the show. So the point was actually to talk about firearms particularly. But that just before the interview, the story broke about Zuma. It was before these riots. And so we said, let's have a broader discussion. We also discussed firearms, but we also, other than just the firearms issue, we had a broader conversation about what's wrong with South Africa. That was basically the broad topic of the conversation.
Before we continue, I just want to say thanks to Brett Sussums, who gave a super chat here. He says, keep up the good work, AfriForum. Keep fighting the good fight. SA's new firearm law is ridiculous. Thank you very much, Brett.
Thank you, Brett.
You're absolutely right. Carl Green here also gave a super chat. Thank you very much, Carl. He says, brilliant guest tonight, Ernst. Thank you, Carl. Yeah. Yes, we're going to be picking my guest's brain tonight in regards to what he has been telling the Americans. So maybe we can start off there. I know so I've listened to your interview with Tucker, and I know the first question that he asked you was in regards to, well, he quickly gives like a little elevator pitch, quick summary of the transition from apartheid to the new South Africa, and he asks you a very broad question. After 1994, what happens next? Maybe you can enlighten the audience in regards to how you summed up that very difficult question.
Yes, so part of his introduction, I think, was brilliant. So firstly, there's two shows, if people don't know that. There's Tucker Carlson Tonight, which is the show that airs on Fox News, on cable news every weeknight at 8:00. It has been, last time I was on in 2018, it was the second most popular news program in the US. Now I think last year they actually broke the record for the news show, the cable news program with the best ratings ever. In other words, the most viewers, there hasn't been a cable news show in South Africa with more viewers than that particular show. So what they did is they started a new, actually two new shows with Tucker. The one is, so I'm sort of segueing into your question. The one is Tucker Carlson Today, and the other one is Tucker Carlson Originals. Now, Tucker Carlson Originals is a documentary type show where they go out to a particular area. They sort of an investigative journalism show. And Tucker Carlson Today is a longer format podcast type of show. So what they did, so I was interviewed on Tucker Carlson Today, and then what they do is they build a short segment that they publish on Tucker Carlson Tonight as well. And that short segment, I uploaded the entire piece onto my Facebook page. So for the longer discussion, that's the one where you need a VPN if you want to watch it. Because you can't have access. If you go on foxnation.com from South Africa, you just get a note that says you don't have access. So his intro, sorry about that long segue. His intro was actually that he remembers when he was younger that everybody spoke about South Africa, and it was an important issue in the US. And he remembers people were campaigning about, free Nelson Mandela, and South Africa needs a new dispensation. And he was part of the anti-apartheid movement at the time, and they won in a way. They got what they wanted, in the sense that the system was dismantled and this new system was put in place. And it's a system with regards to which the United States in particular had played a very particular role. South Africa as we know it today, the South African Constitution as we know it today, the South African system as we know it today, was very much influenced by the United States that pressured us sort of into this particular system. And Tucker's line was, okay, so basically we won the battle to get what we wanted in South Africa. And then after 1994, everyone stopped talking about South Africa. And let's try and figure out, did this actually work? And obviously it didn't.
Let's check back with the South Africans and see how things are going.
Yeah, let's sort of follow up on the South African miracle we established in 1994. And he said, okay, well, so you abolished all these, sort of sarcastically or smirkingly. Okay, so in 1994 you abolished all these race laws, right? And I of course responded and said that I referred to that Politics Web study that was published about a year ago, in which they tried to count how many race laws are there in South Africa. And I think they counted 88. But that's if you take a narrow definition. That's if you actually count legislation, like the BEE Act, the PEPUDA Act, I quoted some of them, the Employment Equity Act, and so forth. But if you take a broader definition, there are thousands of race laws in South Africa because companies are pressured to draw up their own race laws. So almost every private company, or a vast amount of them at least, have their own little race laws that they are implementing. So that's how the interview started, and then from there we built onto a bunch of other topics.
And also part of that, before we continue, maybe congratulations on that interview on YouTube. That clip already has more than 1 million views, so I think that's some good coverage. And that maybe leads me into another question that a lot of people have been asking, and that it's a good faith question. It's not in a snarky manner or in a sarcastic manner. It's rather, they ask, what does AfriForum achieve through these types of interviews, these types of liaison tours? And they want to know, what is the net benefit that AfriForum as an organization gets to the cause through these types of conversations?
Yes, and it's an important question because, and we have to ask ourselves this, to go abroad costs a lot of money. We don't fly first class or business class. We fly economy class. We stay in affordable accommodation. We're not a government office or something. In this case, I was fortunate enough to have them actually pay for part of the trip. AfriForum paid for me to fly to Washington. They actually flew me up to Maine, where Tucker's studio is, and they paid for my accommodation there. And I think that it's important to ask this question: what do we achieve by this? And there are some people, especially on social media, who get frustrated by things like this, because I think people want some form of a silver bullet. People are looking for the one thing that you can do or should do to fix the crisis. And of course, flying to America to do an interview or doing an interview on Fox News is not going to fix the problem. But there's no single thing that we can do to fix the problem. If there is a single thing that we can do to fix the problem, it would be to build institutions, which includes building networks, community safety structures, and so forth. But that's a very broad, vague sort of answer. So yes, I think doing an interview like this is not going to solve the problem, but it is very important to do interviews like this because it's obviously a massive audience. The fact that the interview just on YouTube received more than 1 million views in a few days, not counting the 3-4 million people, I'm not sure how many exactly, who watched it live when it was aired, and not counting the people who watched the online version on Fox Nation. So it's as far as I know, the biggest platform that you can get. I mean, you can go to CNN and speak with Anderson Cooper, and we'd love to do that. Or Fareed Zakaria, and we'd gladly do that. And I've been communicating with some of them. And if we get the opportunity, we will certainly do that. But just in terms of the amount of people who actually watch it, I'm not aware. Maybe there's some show in China that has more viewers, or India. I'm not aware of such show. And it's funny, maybe just to add to that, some comments, people saying, oh, I disagree with Tucker's views. So how can you go on his show? You had some comments on that. But there's a strange phenomenon here where if you speak to an openly leftist journo, I don't recall, it might have happened, but I don't recall someone saying, how dare you associate with this person? Just when I came back, the first interview I did when I came back to South Africa was with Nicholas Bauer. I had an hour interview with him on 702. And Nicholas I don't think he would disagree if I describe him as a leftist. But I haven't heard anyone say, how dare you go on this leftist show? You lose all credibility. But when you go on a show of a person who's more on the conservative side, you get that. So it's
even though in your interview he emphasized the importance of human rights.
Yes, he did. He emphasized the importance of human rights, of individual rights. And yes, we're a communitarian. We have a communitarian approach as AfriForum, and communities are important. But we also believe in individual rights. And we emphasize that both Tucker and I explicitly rejected the apartheid system. We said this is not that we want to go back to. And maybe just I can add to this. This is one thing. This is one of the things I said to Tucker before the interview, that there's something that's very important that I believe, if we want to talk about the bigger picture, there's one of the important things to say here is that there's this false dichotomy in South Africa, and we see it all the time, where if you criticize the current political system, if you say what we have in South Africa is not working, the accusation is, oh, okay, so you're an apartheid apologist. You want to go back to apartheid, which is a very, very narrow way of looking at it. The reality is very simple. You can say the previous system was problematic. The current system is problematic. We need something that's different from both. And it's supposed to be a very simple thing. But so we had to explain that, to say, well, the point is, if we criticize the system in South Africa, we're not saying we want to go back to the previous system. We're saying we want a system that isn't the apartheid system, but that also isn't this homogeneous kumbaya, new South Africa, miracle, rainbow nation.
You just call it rainbowism.
A lot of people call it rainbowism. So rainbowism sounds great. Apartheid sounds horrible. The fact is that rainbowism doesn't work.
The previous dispensation is forced separation by the state, and the current dispensation is forced integration by the state.
Yes, exactly. And it's not even forced integration. It is that, but it's forced homogenization, and that's part of
standardization.
Standardization. The clip that they published was where I quoted Samora Machel, who said, "For the nation to prosper, the tribe must die." And that's, in other words, to say for the South African project to succeed, the Afrikaners must die, or the Boers must die, or the Zulus must die, or the Xhosas. In other words, you have to change your identity. And it's just not that simple. It doesn't work like that. So that's one of the issues, one of the many issues that we touched on during the discussion.
Before we continue, once again, thank you very much to my friend Don Barnard. He gave a super chat here. He says, great conversation, great guest. Thanks for the great company, CC, listening while cooking food. Don, thank you very much. And also, Boer Beer is not a sponsor, but I can definitely endorse it and say, people, if you have an opportunity, go check out Boer Beer or Boer Cola. You can just Google it and it will be the first result, or you can go listen to my interview with Don Barnard on my channel just a week or so ago. Harry Pixels also gives a super chat. He says, good luck, guys. Thank you very much. And then another super chat here from Brett, who says, is Eusebius McKaiser anti-AfriForum? He seems to be. I also get a little bit of a hint that he is. Thank you very much, Brett. And one final super chat here from Herman Roets, also one of my friends. I say, dankie julle twee, baie dankie Herman, waardeer dit. Now, Adam, something that I found was very important that you discussed, and this is actually in the clip that they used on Fox's YouTube channel, was where you talked about the anti-Western sentiment in South Africa. And you said something that's interesting, because I could see it prickled Tucker Carlson's curiosity when you said it. You said maybe the corruption and the chaos and all the problems in South Africa that we're seeing aren't the disease, but rather the symptoms of something else. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I think there's a reason why they chose that segment. Personally, if I had to choose, I would have chosen a different part of the interview to publish. I would have chosen the part where we discuss firearms in South Africa. But there's a reason, I think, why they chose this one, because this is part of the message that resonates with people in America, because it's a warning, and that's actually the line they took on Tucker Carlson Tonight, is they said what's happening in South Africa is a warning to America. Because at the beginning of the interview, I said that these radicals, as they call themselves in South Africa, actually get their cues from America. A lot of them, they teach this, these critical race theory, this type of thing. They teach it at American universities, and then the roads must fall and fees must fall activists read that, and they are inspired by Malcolm X and whoever from the 60s. But we don't have to go into all the strange stuff that comes out of American universities now. But then there's it sort of flips around in a way where the riots, they had these Black Lives Matter riots last year, but that's actually something that came from South Africa. This type of thing, this burning of statues that they see in America, is something that started in South Africa, and that's why one of the points I made in the interview was that there's an underlying anti-Western sentiment here, and that's why we often talk about double standards and so forth, and it is double standards. But the fact is that they don't care that it's double standards, because their point is not to be consistent. Their point is to destroy Western values and to replace Western values and Western identity and Western culture and Western traditions with a new decolonized approach, which they probably would define in different ways. So there's a very strong anti-Western sentiment pushing this. That's why there's an anti-Western sentiment beneath this whole push for expropriation without compensation. If you look at the interviews where they discuss it, you pick that up. There's a very strong anti-Western sentiment below the South African government's relationship with China and the Communist Party of China. South Africa, we touched on this in the interview as well, is one of the top 10 countries, I believe top 5 actually, who most frequently oppose the United States at the United Nations, for example. They would basically just say whatever China says or Zimbabwe says or Cuba says. So yes, it's an important thing that we need to recognize. And we as Afrikaners, at least in South Africa, are Westerners. We regard ourselves as Africans because we even named ourselves after the continent. But we're also Westerners. We don't see Europe as our home or America as our home. We regard ourselves as people who cherish Western values and who live in Africa. And based on that, that's one of the main reasons why we are targeted.
And before we continue, maybe just a little bit of a little trivial question. When you arrived there in America, did you have any jet lag or anything there keeping you down?
Yes, I was. It was actually my time in Maine. Maine is an incredible state. I've never been there before. I was very privileged. I spoke to someone over the phone when I arrived there, and I said, I have no reason to complain about anything again in my life, because Tucker moved. Tucker doesn't live in Washington. I don't know if he lives. I don't think he lives in Washington anymore. He doesn't broadcast from there. So they fly guests up when they interview you in studio. They flew me there. They had someone pick me up at the airport. They took me to an inn near the where we lived. But it was shortly after I flew to Washington from Dar es Salaam through Doha with Qatar Airways, and I couldn't shake off my jet lag. And the night before the interview, we had sort of a meet and greet dinner, which was great. And I went home at about 12. I remember it was morning in South Africa. People were already awake by the time I got back at the hotel, and I just couldn't sleep. So actually the night before the interview, I think I slept 2 or 3 hours. And you can see it in some places. You can see I'm tired doing the interview, and I actually regret that. I regret not taking sleeping pills. But and I think it had a bit of an effect. I saw some people said, well, there was some stage where you sounded like you were rambling, and it's probably true. But yeah, the jet lag had quite an impact on me. At least I think I prepared quite a lot. I had like 5 pages of prepared notes. And what I always do before a long interview like this is I make a long list of notes of stuff that I want to say, and then I narrow them down and say, okay, well, these are the 5 most important things, for example. And we discussed all the stuff that I identified as the most important things to discuss. So in that sense, I'd say the interview was a great success.
Well, in the end, I think that million view count speaks for itself, and from all the feedback I've read, the vast majority is very positive, and I think it did have a very big impact. Just like your first interview there. I also just want to take the opportunity to thank Sharon Westphal, who gave 200 Rand super chat, who says, "Julle is albei opregte mense, verskoon asseblief my vrot en nie vlot Afrikaans." Ja, baie dankie Sharon en mooi woordspeling daar. Ek waardeer regtig baie, dis 'n baie groot tip wat jy daar vir my gegee het. Baie dankie. And yeah, on that note, Ernst, you also, when that clip on Fox's YouTube channel, there's another question there that I think is also one of the bigger questions of our time, and that, especially as South Africans, and more even specifically as Afrikaners, and that is the question of immigration. Tucker asked, why are people leaving? But I think there's another question that he didn't ask, but you kind of answered it in your answer. Why aren't people leaving? So maybe to answer both of those questions, could you elaborate a bit on that whole question surrounding immigration?
Yes, I think, I mean, I can't speak for Tucker, but I got the impression that he has, as I said, he's been reading about the Anglo-Boer War and South African history, and we spoke about history before the interview, and almost everything I mentioned to him about our history, he knew about already, which is part of why I say he's clearly a very well-read person. And during the interview, I would mention someone like Samora Machel, and you can clearly see from his reaction, he knows who I'm talking about. I think a lot of people in South Africa don't know who Samora Machel is, for example. And so I think he actually asked us that in 2018 when we saw him in Washington. He said, "Are you leaving?" And we said to him, "No, we're not leaving." And I was sort of shocked that he asked us. And then when I saw him again now this time, he asked, that's actually the first thing he asked me. He said, "Are you guys leaving?" And I said to him, "No, we're not leaving." And I explained to him why. And obviously there are people leaving, and we spoke about that. But the fact is that it's very sad if people leave South Africa, because you get pushed out. You don't leave because you have this dream about a great future in Australia or wherever. You leave because your dream about a great future in South Africa, has collapsed. But the fact is that there's just too much for the vast majority of us. There's just too much that holds us here, that keeps us here. It's part of our identity. It's part of who we are. I explained to him that we've been in South Africa for longer than Americans, for Afrikaners, or at least our ancestors have been in America for more than 100 years before the United States was founded. It's like asking an American, "Are you going to leave America when you disagree with what the government is doing?" No, we're going to stay here and we're going to create a future.
That's the thing, is that's why I like the slogan of Solidariteit that goes, "Bou om te bly, building to stay." And I think a lot of people are going to stay, and I think you'll find those people working for AfriForum most of the time as well, and also the members of AfriForum. But I think that's a very important question and an important debate that's still going to have a lot of discussion in the future on it. It is a pressing issue regarding the brain drain in South Africa. And I know I receive so many emails from people that have immigrated that are very sad. And I get a lot of emails from people that really feel very isolated, people telling me that they haven't been able to make any friends or any social connections for years, not feeling at home, but they don't have the money to come back. I remember one email to me actually ended with, and I'm translating, it was in Afrikaans, and it ended with, "I should have never have come here. I hope it's going well there at the southern tip of Africa. Have a great day." So yeah, I think that's a very big question we're still going to have to grapple with in the future. But this, you mentioned Zimbabwe earlier, and I know Flip Bass put it so well in his book. He said, what happened in Zimbabwe was a great vaccine for political ideas in South Africa. So people are a bit more resistant to expropriation without compensation. The ANC even goes as far as to name their policy after the Zimbabwean policy, not even doing a little bit of PR polishing there. But what did you tell Tucker about Zimbabwe? What was your discussion like on that topic?
Yeah, so we spoke a bit about the anti-Western sentiment, and we spoke about the ANC's communist history. their link to the Communist Party of China. The interview was recorded 2 days after that joint session with the ANC and the Communist Party of China, where Ramaphosa spoke again about the long friendship they have with this Communist Party, and it was about maybe 2 weeks, I'm not sure how long before. Former President Kgalema Motlanthe said that we have a lot of problems in the world, but the one beacon of hope is China. Now, if you say that to an American, you get the response that you would expect. And Tucker's response was also what we expected it would be. So what I said to Tucker is in the interview, and is that I have this approach, and that I've been doing this every time I have some form of a panel discussion or a debate, or some form of a radio interview with more than one guest, and one of the other persons on the panel or the debate or whoever is a representative of the ANC or the government, I make a point to always ask the question, do you agree that Robert Mugabe and Hugo Chavez are heroes? And sometimes I ask Mao Zedong. And every single time I ask this question, they respond, yes, they are heroes. Robert Mugabe is a hero. And I said that to Tucker, and Tucker's response was, Robert Mugabe is a racist criminal. That's what he is, which of course is true.
I think he called him a monster as well.
Yes, yeah. I think I called him. I think he said he's a racist criminal and a monster, which is true. That's what he was. He was a racist criminal and a monster, and the ANC thinks he's a hero. And the same about what happened in Venezuela. Of course, we in South Africa, we are much more up to speed with the Zimbabwean story than the Venezuelan story. But the fact that they say we're going to do, and they've said this many times, we're going to do in South Africa what they did in Zimbabwe because we are inspired by their policies. But the difference is we're going to do it without violence. So that sort of segued into the discussion about firearms. So they say, we're going to take your land, but this time, the difference between this and Zimbabwe is there's not going to be violence. Oh, and by the way, just before we do that, we're going to take your guns. So that's sort of, and I said to Tucker in the interview that that's just not going to happen. If you have to, and maybe it's a bit of a radical comment to make, but I said to Tucker towards the end of the interview that sometimes, I mean, we all want to be law-abiding. We all want to make sure that we're on the right side of the laws. But sometimes, and hopefully it rarely happens, and ideally it would never happen, but sometimes you get confronted with a piece of legislation that is just so immoral and such a grave breach of the basic foundations of what constitutes justice, that there's a moral obligation on you not to comply with that law. And if we get to a point, we've had small examples of that, people saying we're not going to pay e-toll in South Africa, people breaking some of we had, I mean, obviously we all know about the crazy lockdown regulations. We had people breaking those regulations. But if we get to a point in a country where we have more than 20,000 murders a year, I said to Tucker actually during the interview that to give context, what I actually deliberately did was I tried to summarize all of the major talking points into sound bites to sort of get the point across. Because if you go into the rabbit hole of the extent of corruption in South Africa, you're never going to get out. So I sort of summarized that, and about the crime issue, I said to him, just to explain to you how bad violent crime is in South Africa. Think about all the people who were killed, all the Americans who were killed in World War I, and all the Americans who were killed in World War II. That's hundreds of thousands of people. And you add them together, more people have been murdered in South Africa since the ANC came to power. Yeah. And I said that I tested it with a few people before the interview, and everyone I said this to, I would say this to a taxi driver and see how they respond, and they were completely shocked. So that's the point. I said to Tucker that this is the reality, and now the government says you're not allowed to own a gun for self-defense. So what's going to happen? The natural consequence of this is just going to be that people are not going to hand in their guns. If you have to make a choice between being able to defend yourself in one of the most violent countries on earth with a firearm that is illegal, or complying with the law with a government that's apparently or obviously trying to oppress you by handing in your firearm while they're saying, by the way, we're going to come for your property and all of this. No rational person would just hand in their firearm. So, and that's the irony about this whole policy is if they really want to see an upsurge in illegal firearms, they must make it illegal to own a firearm for self-defense purpose. But the whole point, and that's the craziness about Bekitele's approach, is the whole motivation is, or that's at least what they say, is we have too many illegal firearms in South Africa, so now we're going to make it illegal to own a firearm for self-defense. It's typical ANC logic. It's unfathomable that they could reason like that. But
it's like the ANC logic of no expropriation without compensation will be completely within the parameters of the Constitution. We just need to change the Constitution to enable
it's the same type of ANC logic. It's crazy. And actually, the fact that we're laughing about this is something I don't think it was in the interview. I think it was before the interview. Tucker said something, I can't remember. We spoke about something like this. And I started laughing, as I often do, about these crazy policy ideas. And he sort of stared at me like this. He's like, why are you laughing? But I think it's, in a way, and it's probably to be pessimistic about it, it sort of says to us how we have become used to the abnormal, how the abnormal has become our normal in South Africa, in a way that it feels strange to me to go to a country where you can walk around at night in the city center and not be afraid that someone's going to attack you. You sort of feel not at home. So we've become used to this in a way. Obviously, we need to fight these policies, but I do think, to be optimistic, I think we have to maintain our sense of humor. Otherwise, we're going to go crazy.
Well, Afrikaners do have a notoriously dark sense of humor at times. Also, just want to say thank you to Leonard for his super chat. He says, "Oos West tuis bes." That's absolutely true. And Ruan Nel also gave a super chat. Baie dankie, but no message attached. Ernst, the first time you talked to Tucker, the main focus was expropriation without compensation and farm murders. But this time around, you also talked to him about farm murders. You told him about some of your own personal stories of people that have been attacked on farms or even murdered on farms. And you also discussed Cyril Ramaphosa's infamous lie in 2018 when he told the world that there are no murdering of white farmers in South Africa. How did that topic go?
Yes. So again, as I said earlier, when we decided that it's going to be a broader topic than just firearms, my challenge in preparing was to figure out how can I get to the crux of the matter as quickly as possible and in a way that's memorable, to put it that way. In other words, how do you sum up the violent crime situation, the murder situation in South Africa? And my approach to that was to compare it to World Wars I and II, as I said. And on farm attacks, I decided not to go into the statistics, but to make it personal. And the reason why is because there are very few people left in South Africa, who come from some form of an agricultural community, who don't know someone who has been attacked, or even worse, who's been murdered. I personally, and I'm very sad to say, I knew quite a few people who have been murdered on farms. I've had family members who've been murdered on farms. This is part of the reason why I'm so passionate about this topic. My brother was attacked on a farm. I've had, as I said, family members, friends who went to school with me who've been murdered. So they actually played that clip of Ramaphosa saying there are no farm murders in South Africa. And my response to that was to say, well, let me just tell you the people, not the people, because through AfriForum, we work with victims of farm attacks. So I know dozens of people who have been victims of these attacks, and I've worked with many of them. So my response was, let me tell you only the people I knew before they were attacked, to give you some perspective. And I think that, if I recall, I think the 10 fingers on my two hands were not enough. So, for example, my father's cousin was attacked on a farm in, I didn't know her, but she's family. She's obviously, my father knew her quite well. She was attacked on a farm in Northwest, and she, in a brutal way, she was stoned and then they pierced a garden fork through her head. That's how she died eventually. As I said, my brother was attacked. I knew people who went to. There was a lady I remember growing up who went to church with us, an elderly lady, and one day she didn't go to church. Her husband went to church on that day. I was in church, and he was there without her, and she was murdered while we were in church, or before. I assume just when he left, and someone came running into the church, the sermon, interrupted it. Just to call him out. And what happened is she was tortured. It's an old lady, and eventually they killed her by crushing her skull with a hammer. I believe it was a 10-pound hammer, one of these big hammers. And so I mentioned a bunch of these examples of people I knew who've been attacked and killed. And I said, well, imagine if you're an American and your brother was a victim of a particular crime. Fortunately, my brother was actually attacked by, you can call them serial farm attackers. They were caught eventually. They had committed several farm murders and many farm attacks. And from what we could gather, he was the only one of their victims who was not physically hurt during the attack.
No, he was just tied up, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they tied up. So he was injured in a way, just from how he was tied up. And they stuck a revolver into his face, and I think they said to him they're going to kill him. And they had him lie down on the floor, and they pulled Now imagine that just for a second. They have you lie down on the floor. You're tied up with your hands behind your back. You have to lie on the floor with your face down. They put a blanket over you. They've got revolvers, and they tell you they're going to kill you. So how do you? What's going through your mind at that stage? You assume this is my last few seconds on earth. Now, in his case, they didn't kill him. So the point I made was: imagine if this is your reality. Imagine if the fingers on your two hands are not enough to count the people you knew who have been murdered, or the people you know who are still alive who've been attacked, and those are only the ones you knew before they were attacked. And now the president goes on air and says this problem doesn't exist. How would you respond to that? So I'm very glad we got to that, because that was one of the low, at least as far as I'm concerned, one of the low points of post-1994 South Africa was the president of the country going onto an international platform declaring that this is all a lie. There are no farm murders in South Africa. It's atrocious, and it's I don't think there's another word to describe it than to say it was really a disgusting comment to make by someone who calls himself the president of a country.
And for someone that also knows people that have been attacked, thankfully not people that have been murdered on their farms. It also seeing that comment was also very despicable. But at the same time, you'd think an accountable or watchdog media would then jump on his back and immediately tell him, no, Mr. President, this is false, and fact check him. But no, the media kind of rather wrote pieces on this is what the president actually meant. You guys are just overreacting.
Yeah,
but imagine if the president had said there's no domestic violence in South Africa, and then the media says
women are victims of crime in South Africa. Imagine if he said that, and then News 24 goes and writes a commentary and say, well, we know technically it's not true, but we have to sort of support him because what he actually meant was the following. And then they sort of bash everyone all of his critics. So that's what they did. I remember that piece by News 24 by Peter de Tooy, where he immediately rushed to the president's defense after the president said there are no farm murders in South Africa.
No, there's no way to interpret it in any other way.
Yeah, but not if you're Peter de Tooy, who works for News 24. Obviously not. Apparently not.
Yeah. Before we continue, I see Rhodesians Never Die gave a super chat here. Thank you very much. I appreciate it immensely. And it's something that I saw when people watched the clip of you on Fox News, and there wasn't the full interview, unfortunately. They said you needed to talk about corruption, but the thing is you actually did. What did you, maybe you can enlighten them in regards to the story of corruption in South Africa is an hour-long discussion, at least on its own. But it's a big question, but what did you choose to focus on?
Yeah, so corruption is a very good example of something that if you start explaining the Zondo Commission and the arms deal, and if I have to explain on an interview like that, what's the story with Nkandla? That's a problem. There are so many stories about corruption, but let's take one. If we have to explain Nkandla, it's probably going to take 3 minutes or something. So I had to figure out, how do I summarize corruption? Again, as I said earlier, in a way that's striking, that Americans would understand, and that's memorable. People must remember it. And so eventually what I got to, my approach to that was to try to make a comparison to America. Now, obviously, and that's what I said in the interview, we don't know the true extent of corruption, because the whole point is to steal money without ever being caught. So we don't know how much money has been stolen in South Africa. What we do know is Bloomberg published an article, and it's been published on several other platforms as well, estimating or claiming that more than 500 billion rands was stolen through corruption during Zuma's 2-term presidency. Now, if you convert that to dollars, it's about, I think it's $35 billion. And so I said to Tucker in the interview, I said that corruption in South Africa has reached the point where you can start, and that's really, I was actually shocked to interrupt myself when I discovered this, that corruption in South Africa has reached the point where you can start expressing it as a percentage of GDP. Think about that for a moment. The GDP of a country, and you can calculate corruption as a percentage of GDP.
A significant percentage.
Yes, exactly. And so if you calculate it according to those stats, we know it's probably more than that, but it's about, I think it's around 1.5% of GDP per year. But if you say, okay, well, it's spread out over a 2-term presidency, and you compare that to, that's about, what was it, close to, let's say 10% about of GDP. So if you compare that to America, that's the line I took. I said, let's try to make a comparison to America. So imagine a 2-term presidency. Imagine Barack Obama is president for 2 terms, as he was, or George Bush, George W. Bush. And during that time, if the same amount of money was stolen by government officials through corruption, it would have been trillions of US dollars that would have been stolen. And at least, again, I tested this with a few Americans before the interview, and it's that was my approach to making it understandable. And people were completely shocked. The reaction I got from people when I spoke with him, and Tucker's as well, was that they knew corruption was bad, but they didn't think about it like this, or they didn't know that it's that bad, as if $2 trillion were stolen if you compare it in the US during, for example, let's say Barack Obama's presidency. How would Americans have reacted? And do you still, how do you respond to the idea of continuing to pay taxes if this is your reality? And that's the reality we have in South Africa. So that was the line I took, at least on corruption.
And I think a question that arises naturally from this type of conversation is also, but what does AfriForum want? I mean, we're talking to all these people in foreign countries. We're telling them about South Africa, but what are you? I mean, this is what a lot of our detractors say. They make up all these things that this is what AfriForum wants, or this is what AfriForum is asking for, as if they've got this secret intel that I don't know where they're getting it from. But it's absolutely untrue. But maybe you can put it on the record very simply. What does AfriForum want from, for example, foreign countries like America through these types of liaison tours?
That's something we discussed in the interview as well. And Tucker almost pressed it more than I did, because I'm a firm believer of the approach that one country shouldn't try to solve the problems of another country. It's not America's job to say, oh well, then Sudan has some problems. Let's take some drones and go and fix their problems on their behalf. That's not what America should do. But what I did say in the interview is that America must at least accept some form of responsibility. And Tucker actually pressed it more than I did, and I'm glad that he did, as an American, that part of the reason why we have this situation in South Africa is due to America's influence in the early 90s and the late 80s, but especially early 90s, who pushed for us to have what we have in South Africa. And so America must accept some form of responsibility for what's happening. That doesn't mean they must, they need to fly in with jets and fix the problems in South Africa. But for a start, they should be talking about South Africa. They should be telling the truth about South Africa. And there are a lot of ways, practical ways, in which America as a government can pressure South Africa, or can do something, and it's through diplomatic means. One of these is the AGOA agreement, for example, the trade agreement between America and South Africa, and we want that agreement to stay in place. But also the agreement says that this is how we're going to trade between the two countries. But part of the prerequisites for this trade agreement is that the partners to this agreement have to respect property rights, and they have to promote a free market. So we don't want them to step out of the agreement, but they can use that agreement as leverage. So there are a few different ways in which they can pressure South Africa, and put pressure on the South African government. The South African government's opposing them, as I said, at the United Nations, one of the countries in the world that most frequently opposes the US on virtually everything the United States says. South Africa would vote against it. And there's also a lot of ways in which ordinary Americans can help. One of them is just spreading the word, talking to people, sharing stuff on social media and so forth. But you can make a financial contribution as well. You can join Friends of AfriForum, for example, or some other organization from abroad. And to donate $10 a month isn't much, but if you translate it to rand, it's worth more to us. So that's, I think, what we should be doing in the future is get more people abroad who support the cause in South Africa to donate small amounts of money per month, and it would make a big difference.
Yeah, and for those that are interested in supporting AfriForum that live abroad, there's a link in the description under Friends of AfriForum. You can click on that, and then you can click on Donate, and you can give a contribution to defending the rights of minorities and individual rights in South Africa, but also supporting a bigger movement in the solidarity movement, which is building universities and institutions and state-proof solutions for the future. So your money will definitely not be wasted. And if you're living in South Africa, I mean, I might be preaching to the choir, but you need to become a member of AfriForum as well. You can make a very small contribution, but it makes a big difference. The more members we have, the bigger our impact on the international stage as well, because we can say we have 289,000 members, making us the largest civil rights organization in the Southern Hemisphere. That's a very powerful statement that our members make possible. So the more people that sign up, the more people that become members make more possible for AfriForum. That we can fight the good fight even harder.
And just to add, it makes it impossible to ignore what AfriForum is doing and what AfriForum is saying. The stronger our mandate, the bigger our voice. And that's actually how we started the interview. I think that was sort of one of the first or the second question is Tucker asked me just to explain who is AfriForum. And the fact that I can say we have more than 280,000 members, and it's not 280,000 people who signed a petition, it's people who actually make a monthly contribution. It really strengthens our voice to be able to do these type of interviews.
Absolutely. I see there's a question here. It's a bit off topic, so but I'll answer it to the best of my ability. But thank you very much, firstly, Judge Caligula Bushman, for your €10 super chat. I really appreciate it. He says, I often come across Afrikaners that feel resentful towards Dutch/Flemish because of the contribution of our governments in ending apartheid. How common is this sentiment amongst your people? I can only speak from my own personal experience. I've never met an Afrikaner that has any type of hard feelings towards the Flemish or the Dutch in that regard, in like a serious manner. They might make a little flippant comment about it, but it's not. There's definitely not a hatred or a resentment. The Afrikaner community in South Africa actually has a very strong support base and a very strong feeling for the Flemish in regards to their own personal cultural fight on the European continent as a small cultural minority. I don't know if you have anything to add there, Adams.
No, I think it's true. I have picked it up, not some form of an aggression or resentness.
It'll be like a snarky comment.
Yeah, but I've heard people say, "Oh well, remember the Dutch? You know, we sort of descend from the Dutch, and they weren't there for us when we needed them." But again, we need to solve our own problems, and I think, and maybe that's a topic for another day. But I think the system that we had before this, the white minority government, so to speak, wasn't sustainable. It had to change. But if you say it had to change, it doesn't mean that it had to change into what we currently have. it wasn't sustainable. It was going to change in any case. So if someone pressured South Africa to change the political system, it was inevitable in any case. But I do think, and it goes back to that's something we discussed off air, was speaking about the Anglo-Boer War. Tucker asked, how is there a resentment among Afrikaners towards English, white English people or the British? And he said to me that he doesn't pick it up. And I said to him, it's not really there anymore. Yes, you get people, if you read about history, you get angry about the concentration camps, but there's not really a resentment anymore. I have many English friends. I know a lot of people in England and who aren't South Africans, and I don't regard them as enemies or something like that. Yes, we had a very sad history, but part of the reality currently is this, as I mentioned, this anti-Western sentiment, and the West has a very sad history of Westerners killing each other and genociding each other and slaughtering each other in war, and it's very, very sad, and we were the victims of that as well. But in a way, we are part of the Western civilization, so to speak, but we are in Africa, and I think there's also an onslaught on Western civilization in England. And I think it's part of our role to take a stance on that with regard to that as well. The same way I would hope that it's part of their role to take a stance about what's happening in South Africa.
I see there's another super chat from Rhodesians Never Die, who says, I'm a social media marketer. Please can I assist AfriForum market themselves nationally and internationally? Well, thank you very much for offering. AfriForum has a very talented marketing team, but you can always help by sharing our links, sharing all our press statements, telling people to become friends of AfriForum. We'd greatly appreciate it, but thank you very much. And yeah, Ernst, maybe a final thought in regards to your question with your discussion with Tucker before we wrap up. You talked about, he asked you about Julius Malema.
Yeah.
What did you share with him? I mean, that's also a big question that can fill an entire interview, but what did you share with Tucker there?
Yes,
and also maybe how the South African Human Rights Commission factors into this.
Yes, so again, as you said, how do you summarize what Malema is and the role that Malema is playing in a few sentences? I explained that he's from what I can recall, what I said was that he used to be the president of the ANC Youth League. He was kicked out of the ANC, not because of his racist comments or anything like that, but because he openly opposed the president, and then they kicked him out. So it was due to internal issues. And then he started the EFF, as we know, and the EFF doesn't have a lot of support. It's a fairly small party, but they have become the tail that's wagging the dog, so to speak, in the sense that the ANC is so afraid not to be radical, not to be seen as radical and revolutionaries. So now there is this much more radical, much more revolutionary movement in terms of what they say. So the ANC would say, no, we want EWC, but we want to be responsible. The EFF says the state must own everything. But the ANC is so afraid not to be radical that they would allow the EFF to dictate the debate just so that they wouldn't be seen as opposing them. While the EFF doesn't have support, it doesn't have a lot of support. The EFF won't get, at least the way they're approaching politics now, they won't get majority support. They won't become the government. The vast majority of black people are extremely annoyed with the EFF. But they are this sort of small phenomenon, this intolerant minority in a way that is dictating politics in South Africa.
And I see Buren Beton says EFF supporting AfriForum 500,000 Rand at a time. So yeah, that's with the court cases we win against them. Adams, maybe just a final question there. How is the South African Human Rights Commission and the institutions that should be checks and balances factored into this?
Yes, that's an important point we discussed, and we've issued a statement about that last year about the fact that the Human Rights Commission is part of the problem in South Africa. It's not a trustworthy institution, and the Human Rights Commission is supposed to be one of the so-called checks and balances So and that's part of the role America played, is to say this is the type of system we need. We need a, as they called it, one man, one vote, representative democracy, liberal democracy with a constitution that entrenches individual rights. And yes, there's a risk of as they call it, a tyranny of the majority. In other words, someone gets the majority of votes and that person is some form of a tyrant and just destroys the country. But don't worry, there's a way in which we're going to prevent this from happening. And that is that we're going to put in place checks and balances. And the checks and balances are especially things like the Chapter 9 institutions, as we call them, which is the Human Rights Commission, the Public Protector, and there are a bunch of others that people don't even know about because they're so useless. And the Human Rights Commission, as we know in South Africa, when the Malema was charged with hate speech at the Human Rights Commission for his comments about genocide against white people, the Human Rights Commission said, no, well, it's not hate speech. And the reason why it's not hate speech is because he's black. And we need to have double standards. So we need to first consider the race of the accused, and that sort of determines how we should approach it. So the Human Rights Commission is part of the problem in South Africa. And the system, the argument was that we're going to be protected against some form of tyrannical government or oppressive government or despotic government, or whichever word you want to use, by these checks and balances. But the checks and balances are now doing the opposite, the so-called checks and balances, and that is that they are supporting the government in these ideologies. We have this other commission, they call it the Section 185 Commission. It's it has this long name, Protection and Promotion of the Rights of Cultural, Linguistic, and Religious Communities. I think that's the name of the commission. About no one knows about it because they don't do anything. They get money from government that they just waste. But at one stage, so the point of that commission is to protect cultural communities, to protect especially minorities in South Africa, language communities, cultural communities, linguistic, religious, and so forth. And at one stage, a few years ago, AfriForum had this campaign to preserve mother tongue education in schools. And this commission, out of the blue, suddenly woke up from their slumber and issued a statement and just said they reject AfriForum's campaign to promote mother tongue education. That's at the very core of what that commission is supposed to be doing. But they've become a spokesperson or a tool for the ANC's revolution. And that's part of, it's a very important talking point that we should be talking about more, is the fact that these so-called checks and balances, constitutional checks and balances, are not only ineffective, some of them are doing the exact opposite to what they were supposed to be doing, which is that they are strengthening a despotic government as opposed to slowing it down.
No, well, Ernst, I think we've about covered now most of the topics and stuff that you discussed with Tucker, and I really appreciate your time, and also thank you very much for everyone that tuned in. Before we wrap up and before I hear your final thoughts, I would just like to thank our sponsor again, Bitvice, who's run by someone you've also met, Ricky Allardyce, in the past. And they've got this website now, and they have been, I'm grateful for the fact that they're sponsoring my show. So Bitvice, for those that are interested in getting into Bitcoin, is the only platform in South Africa that allows you to buy Bitcoin and have it sent to your own self-custody by default. This means you are exposed to zero counterparty risk. Your Bitcoin is much safer from hacks, confiscation, or regulatory capture when you self-custody it yourself. Bitvice offers hands-on guidance for setting up your self-custody solution. You will hold your hand setting up your wallet if need be, or point you to the best solutions available on the market today if you would rather do it yourself. Bitvice offers the highest referral fee in South Africa for sending clients our way. If you wish to get your friends and family involved in Bitcoin and want them to hold their Bitcoin in their own self-custody wallet, send them to us and we will pay you 0.25% of their order value in Bitcoin for every order they make at no cost to them. So thank you very much, Bitvice, for sponsoring these episodes, and you can go check out their website. There's a link in the description. If you follow that link and use their service, I also get the referral. So thank you very much. And like I always say, I'm not going to just take sponsors because they give me money. I know these people personally, and I know that they're not scammers, and I know that they provide a very good service. They helped me with setting up my Bitcoin wallet and my crypto stuff. So that's very good. But Ernst, thank you very much for your time. Maybe just a final thought. What does the future hold? Anything from the international media or something that we can expect in the near future?
Yeah, so I do have a final thought that's more a question than a thought, and maybe people can comment, and I'd come back and I'd love to read people's views on that. So just in terms of the future, I spent most of my afternoon working on a sort of an updated plan of action or strategy for what AfriForum should be doing. What is it that we want to achieve abroad? But in this case, obviously, we're not only doing liaison in America, but you have to approach each country differently. So what do we want to achieve in America? And I'm sort of updating that. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for us that we should still go into. My final thought is as I said, it's more a question. And I might not frame it properly now because I'm sort of still thinking about it. And that's how should we approach what is the best possible strategy? There are many good strategies, but what is the best possible long-term strategy to approach international media like this interview? And in a way, what we want to do is, and I saw that in some of the sentiments in the comments and people discussing the interview, is we want to, we have this opportunity now. We need to just rail against the South African government. And that's in a way what I did. And the question is, to what extent should we portray ourselves as victims? Because we are victims. There's not even a debate about that. But at some stage, how much are we going to achieve by telling people this is how bad it is? Everyone's leaving. Everyone's getting killed. Corruption. All our money is stolen. This is a lost cause. We've lost. This black pill type of approach. And I honestly don't believe that it's a lost cause. I honestly don't believe that we've lost and all of that. But I sometimes get the impression, and I know social media is not always the best indication of that you should take your cues from, that some people at least get upset when you don't frame what's happening in South Africa as a lost cause. And I think that we not only me personally, I mean at AfriForum and at the Solidarity Movement, one of the greatest things, the most positive things that happened probably since 1994, but recently in particular, was the Soltech College campus that we spoke about earlier. It's there. It's a 300 million project. It's there. People are studying there. It's a private thing. I've been there a few times, and it's an amazing, and in a way, it was sort of exacerbated by the fact that in the same week when that was announced, it became known that Lesotho spent 400 million on sanitizer in schools, like 100 million rand more than it cost to build this university. So the point I'm getting to is I don't think we're going to succeed or achieve much, or as much as we can achieve, if we try to present everything as a lost cause. I think what I've learned, I saw this especially in Hungary. We didn't talk about Hungary a lot, and I saw this in America now as well, is you get a lot more respect if you really if you really tell people how bad things are, but then also to say, well, we're not leaving, and the fight isn't over. We're sort of, in a way, just getting started. In a way, you get a lot more respect. And if you tell people, listen, we don't want you to solve our problems. We're going to solve them ourselves. But you can help. You can put pressure and so forth. We're not waiting for America to fix South Africa's problems or to protect minorities in South Africa. They're not going to do it in any case. But we need to, and I think we do recognize that the most significant chunk of the solution lies within us. And we need to accept that. And we also need to say it, I think, when we speak to people abroad. Then, of course, you run the risk of people saying, well, you should have presented South Africa more as a lost cause. But I don't think the lost cause approach is, you're going to get people riled up and you're going to get people angry about the ANC, but you're not necessarily going to convince them to take you seriously. So that's, as I said, that's more of a question, and I'd like to hear people's comments on that. But maybe that's a good question we can leave for the comment section, and I'll come back in a few days and see what people think about that.
Yeah, open-ended question to end it all off. Some food for thought, definitely. But thank you very much, Adams, for your time. This has been a very enlightening discussion. I hope now, like I said, it's unfortunate that the interview is not on YouTube, but what Adams discussed with me tonight is the vast majority of the points that he discussed with Tucker. So if you listened to the show tonight, you have a very good idea of what was discussed there. And yeah, thank you also to everyone that gave a super chat. Thank you very much for everyone that tuned in. We had a massive audience tonight. Thank you very much for everyone that shared. Also, please share this the link to this YouTube after you've done watching on social media. Your friends and family get the message out. That really helps. Don't think that you're too small to make a difference. That sharing of them and amplifying the message really helps out AfriForum and the greater cause quite a lot. So thank you very much, guys. You can also help the channel. If you're new to this channel, then like these types of conversations, you can click subscribe. You can also click the like button. That's going to help this show out a lot. And if you're watching while this is not live, you can put your thoughts, maybe even your answers to Adam's question there at the end in the comment section below. I read all the comments and I respond to as many as possible. So it's greatly appreciated as well. So cheers, guys. Have a good one. And Adams, I hope you also have a good evening.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. God bless.